1. What is fear? Stealing from your life. How often have you remained frozen by the thought of what might happen, while life moves forward without waiting for your participation? Fear doesn't live in the external circumstances surrounding us, but rather in the narratives we construct within our minds. Stoic philosophy teaches us that we suffer far more from our imagination than from actual reality. Our minds excel at creating catastrophic scenarios: rejection during a crucial job interview, the collapse of an important project, the loss of a meaningful relationship. It's precisely this mental fabrication that paralyzes us, preventing us from making that critical phone call, stepping beyond our comfort zone, changing careers, or ending a toxic relationship. Ancient Stoic teachings remind us that life inevitably contains suffering and challenges. However, we don't achieve freedom by avoiding these difficulties, but by confronting them with clarity and awareness. Fear possesses the strange ability to transport us constantly, either hurling us toward a catastrophic future that hasn't occurred, or dragging us back to a painful past we cannot alter. What it never does is allow us to inhabit the present moment, the only time when we can actually take action. Stoic philosophers championed the concept of inner preparation as a fundamental tool. This preparation means that fear must first be confronted in the mind, not on the battlefield. It's preliminary work, a discipline of anticipation that enables us to be ready when real adversity presents itself. The Stoics help us understand that, contrary to popular belief, we shouldn't avoid contemplating possible tragedies or failures. On the contrary, we should visualize them and prepare ourselves emotionally for their possibility. Stoicism teaches us to practice what they called negative visualization, consciously imagining the worst possible scenarios, not to feed anxiety, but to demystify the power that fear holds over us. By mentally contemplating our fears, we strip them of their element of surprise and begin developing strategies to confront them. Marcus Aurelius made it clear that in his meditations that much of our fear stems from the creations of our disturbed minds. He taught that by calmly examining our fears, many reveal themselves as mere specters without real substance. It's not that dangers don't exist, but that our perception magnifies them until they become overwhelming. In his teachings, Seneca shows us that fear feeds on uncertainty and dissolves in the face of clarity. When we directly confront what we fear, when we name it and examine it under the light of reason, we discover that much of its power over us lies in our refusal to look at it directly. The real cost of fear isn't the painful experiences we want to avoid, but the enriching experiences we never have because we're paralyzed, the new job we never applied for, the honest conversation we never had, the journey we always postponed, the vulnerability we never showed. Epictetus reminded us that life is too brief to live as prisoners of our own terrors. When fear whispers that you're not capable, that you might fail, that others will judge you, remember that according to Stoicism, true freedom doesn't consist in the absence of obstacles, but in the ability to maintain serenity and determination in the face of them. It's not the absence of fear that defines courage, but the decision to act despite it. Stoic philosophy shows us that fear tries to convince us that comfort and security are more valuable than growth. It whispers that it's better not to try than to risk failure. But in that apparent protection lies the real trap, a life of unexplored possibilities, of unrealized potential. In this first section, we must honestly recognize, what is fear preventing in your life? What conversations do you avoid? What decisions do you postpone? What dreams have you filed away for fear of failure? Only when we clearly identify what fear is stealing from us can we truly begin the journey to overcome it. 2. Fear isn't defeated with force, it's overcome with clarity. Fear doesn't respect schedules or arrive with advance warning. It appears precisely when we most need to be centered. During the decisive job interview, while waiting for a loved one's medical results, or in the instant before making a decision that will change the course of our lives. According to Stoicism, fear isn't a moral weakness or personal failure. but an inherent part of human nature. Stoic philosophers taught that we cannot choose whether fear will appear in our lives, but we can decide what authority we grant it over our actions. One of Stoicism's most powerful teachings is the clear differentiation between what is under our control and what is not. When fear invades us, the Stoics invite us to ask ourselves a fundamental question: does this really depend on me? This simple but profound distinction completely changes our relationship with fear. Stoic philosophy provides us with practical tools for facing fear when it appears. Precisely naming what causes us fear. By giving a specific name to our terror, we limit it, converting it into something concrete rather than a diffuse and overwhelming threat. I'm afraid of public speaking is more manageable than generalized anxiety without a name. Asking ourselves, if what I fear actually happened, what would I do? This question is transformative because it changes how the brain functions. Instead of spinning in panic spirals, it begins formulating strategies and solutions. Fear loses its power when we start visualizing how we would respond to the feared scenario. Practicing conscious breathing. The Stoics taught techniques for containing emotional impulses that began with breath control. When fear unleashes, our breathing becomes shallow and rapid. By regaining conscious control of this fundamental process, we send signals to our brain that we are safe. Cultivating rational acceptance. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated in his writings that much of human suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our resistance to accepting them as a natural part of life. Fear dissolves considerably when we accept that pain, loss, and uncertainty aren't exceptions in human existence, but inevitable components of it. Seneca made it clear that most of our fears relate to events that will never occur. We torment ourselves in advance, wasting vital energy fighting ghosts. This clarity is liberating. We don't need more strength to combat fear. We need more lucidity to recognize how much of it is real and how much is projection. One of the most universal fears is the terror of others' judgment. We constantly paralyze ourselves, thinking about what others will say about our decisions, appearance, or expressions. Epictetus reminded us that this fear is based on an illusion, the belief that others constantly think about us. The reality is that each person is too busy with their own concerns to dedicate as much time to judging us as we fear. The fear of failure, another great paralyzer, is significantly reduced when we understand what the Stoics taught about failed attempts. Each attempt, even those that don't achieve the expected result, is invaluable practice for the next attempt. Failure isn't the opposite of success, but a necessary component on the path toward it. True courage isn't cultivated in grand heroic speeches or dramatic gestures. It's forged in the silence of daily decisions, in those small moments when we choose action despite fear. The courageous person isn't one who never feels fear, but one who has learned to act even when fear is present. Stoic philosophy teaches us that fear often disguises itself as prudence. We convince ourselves that we're being sensible when we're actually yielding to terror. The Stoics invite us to clearly distinguish between reasonable caution and paralysis from fear. The former protects us while maintaining our capacity for action. The latter chains us with the illusion of security. Facing situations that generate fear, the Stoics help us understand that what's important isn't avoiding discomfort, but learning to function effectively within it. The secret isn't waiting for fear to disappear before acting, but acting while fear is present, demonstrating to our mind that we can function despite it. Our power doesn't reside in controlling external circumstances, but in governing our internal response to them. When fear arises, it's not the situation itself that determines our well-being, but the interpretation we make of it and the response we choose to give. Fear tries to convince us that we need absolute certainty before acting. Stoic philosophers taught the opposite. Human life inevitably unfolds in uncertainty, and waiting for absolute guarantees means renouncing living fully. The clarity we need isn't about the outcome, but about our values and priorities. 3. Don't fight against fear, become greater than it. Stoic wisdom reveals a fundamental truth about fear. It's not about completely eliminating it from our experience, but about building a self so solid and lucid that fear, though present, no longer determines our actions. Epictetus made it clear that in his teachings that, although we cannot control everything that happens to us, we can prepare ourselves to face any circumstance with dignity and composure. This preparation isn't physical, but mental and emotional, constant training of our capacity to respond to adversity. According to Stoicism, we need systematic emotional self-education. This involves training our mind, day after day, to resist the impulse of panic and develop silent but effective courage. It's not about grand heroic gestures, but about small daily victories over our tendencies toward evasion and paralysis. True growth begins when we stop seeing fear as an enemy to defeat and start treating it as a teacher that reveals aspects of ourselves that need attention. Seneca emphasized that our fears are maps that point precisely to where we need to work to strengthen our character. Stoic philosophers offer us concrete practices for this daily work. Each morning, before beginning the day, we can ask ourselves, what fear will I face today? This questioning doesn't seek to generate anxiety, but to activate our conscious determination not to evade the challenging situations we know we'll encounter. At the end of the day, we should reflect, what did fear try to take from me today? Did I allow it? This honest review allows us to recognize both our advances and our surrenders, without destructive judgment, but with clear awareness. If fear prevailed in some situation, Stoic philosophy teaches us not to fall into self-condemnation. However, we also shouldn't allow that defeat to remain unanswered. Tomorrow, we'll return to the battlefield with greater knowledge and renewed determination. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated in his reflections that each obstacle is actually an opportunity to exercise virtues that would otherwise remain dormant. Fear, seen from this perspective, isn't an impediment to our greatness, but the necessary stage where it can manifest. The Stoics help us understand that authentic courage doesn't need an audience or recognition. It doesn't express itself in shouts or dramatic gestures. True courage manifests in the silent decision to continue advancing when everything in us asks to retreat. It's that calm in the middle of the storm, that clarity when everything seems confusing. The wise person isn't defined by the absence of fear, but by the way they manage it. Feeling fear is natural and inevitable. Being governed by it is a choice. Each time we act despite fear, we're exercising our most fundamental freedom, deciding which internal forces will determine our actions. In his teachings, Epictetus shows us that inner freedom is cultivated precisely in those moments when we choose not to be slaves to our reactive emotions. When fear arises and we decide not to obey it automatically, we're strengthening our muscle of self-determination. Stoic philosophy recognizes that there are rational fears that serve a protective function. It's not about ignoring them recklessly, but evaluating them objectively to determine if they're providing valuable information or simply reflecting limiting thought patterns. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated that many of our fears are rooted in a distorted vision of what we really need to be happy. We fear losing positions, possessions, or prestige because we've anchored our identity and worth in these external elements. By remembering that our true value resides in our capacity to maintain internal integrity, many of these fears lose their power over us. Stoic philosophers championed a vision of human beings as capable of enduring much more than they imagine. This confidence isn't based on naive optimism, but on historical observation of extraordinary human resilience. People have survived and prospered after experiences that, anticipated from fear, would seem unbearable. Becoming greater than fear means developing an identity so firm, a purpose so clear, and values so rooted that, although fear may shake our surface, it cannot displace our center. It's like a deep-rooted tree that can be shaken by the storm, but not uprooted by it. True transformation occurs when we move from asking, "How can I eliminate this fear?" to "Who must I become so that this fear no longer stops me?" This question takes us from the limited focus of fighting an external enemy to the powerful work of strengthening our inner being. Seneca reminded us that constant practice is fundamental. We cannot expect to respond with courage to great crises if we haven't cultivated this response in small daily challenges. Each time we choose the discomfort of growth over the comfort of evasion, we're training our capacity to face greater fears. Finally, the Stoics help us understand that overcoming fear isn't a definitive achievement, but a continuous process. We don't reach a point where fear disappears forever from our experience. Rather, we develop such a conscious and balanced relationship with it that its presence no longer determines our choices. The Stoic path to overcoming fear doesn't promise a life without emotional turbulence, but the capacity to navigate these waters with a firm rudder. It doesn't promise the absence of storms, but the ability to maintain course despite them. It doesn't eliminate the darkness of fear, but develops in us an inner light so powerful that darkness can no longer dominate us. Have you noticed how your life changes when you act despite fear? Which Stoic teaching resonates most with you for confronting your own terrors? Share your experience in the comments and help us create a community of people committed to their inner growth. If this video has given you a new perspective on how to handle fear in your life, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who you think could benefit from this message, and subscribe to the channel for more content that helps you cultivate a balanced and strong mind in the face of life's challenges.